Hello, this is Molly McCaffrey with my final for Soc 212, Human Sexuality. So the topic of human sexuality is so broad and ever-changing, it is impossible to explain it in just one podcast or even a semester's class, even a bachelor's degree, and there's still so much that you could learn. There are, of course, a handful of things that I can discuss somewhat quickly to give someone a better understanding of just one aspect of human sexuality. So, the point of focus for this podcast will be on sexuality in institutions, specifically the systematic oppression of marginalized groups who are incarcerated. And to do this, I'm going to elaborate on how sexuality is socially constructed, how sexuality relates to and reinforces social inequalities, and I'm going to explain how sexuality is used as a means of control and resistance. The first point of discussion that I am going to get into is how sexuality is socially constructed and how it shows within marginalized groups of people who are incarcerated. We know that gender is a socially constructed term that changes over time and location. Within contexts, locations, families, communities, they all see gender as different things, different definitions. Saltsky et al., 2017. The next point of discussion that I'm going to get into is how sexuality relates to and reinforces social inequalities through marginalized groups of people who are incarcerated or have been. As I mentioned, gender is ever-changing between locations and communities and contexts. And there is a large connection, a strong connection between history and current inequality patterns. Historical contexts show that fathers and husbands were the more prominent and important citizens in most places. Svolcek et al., 2017. These inequalities are still reinforced, but there are more complications to it, like age, race, gender, status. For example, Ridgway, 2013, says that for something to be unequal, there needs to be a status difference or a power holder. Prisons are all about power, not only within the incarcerated population, but even between correction officers and inmates. So, like the staff and the inmates. Therefore, of course, within female prisons, there can be a lot more problems. Also, after prison, women are treated much more unfairly, whether that is by the court system, probation, parole officers, even strangers. So just one example of that could be the this doesn't have to do with incarcerated groups, but the different rules and regulations around women and females on social media and stuff like that. They're just policed differently, and we can see that through many different examples. Ruberg and Sared, 2011. The last point of discussion that I am going to get into is how sexuality is used as a mean of used as means of control and resistance through marginalized groups of incarcerated people. So one of the easiest ways to explain this is through a story wrote by Richie of a woman who was arrested for a call that she made. She was detained for a phone call. No, I'm sorry. She placed a phone call after being assaulted by her boyfriend, and the officers on scene detained her instead of the man in question, and she was not arrested, so she technically had the right to leave. Although they would not let her leave, they were harassing her, and when she used her BlackBerry to record the harassment and then show it later on, she was charged with 2 counts of wiretapping. And these are just, these stories are just too familiar. They're everywhere. And it's very unfortunate that even someone who was not even incarcerated, hopefully was not going to be, but I want to say was not even incarcerated yet and was still being abused and harassed by this system and by the people that we are supposed to trust the most. So as you may be able to tell, human sexuality is very complicated and just an ever-changing topic. Even not only even over time, but just locations and communities right here at this time in the world, at this time in our lives, and in the many different places in the world. Like, there are still many different definitions of gender. And so I hope throughout this podcast, I hope you were able to see how sexuality is socially constructed, how it relates to and reinforces social inequalities, and how it is used as a means of control through marginalized people who are incarcerated. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate it. I hope you have a good rest of your break and a good next semester. Thank you.